I worked the night shift at Millhaven County Morgue for 11 years. And in that time, I saw things that stripped the romanticism from death, the way cold water strips paint slowly, completely, without mercy. I am not a superstitious man. I was raised by an engineer father and a nurse mother, both of whom treated mystery as a problem waiting for a practical solution. I believed in decomposition rates in rigor mortis timelines, in the chemistry of putrefaction. I believed in clipboards and documentation and the blue-white hum of fluorescent lighting. What happened during the winter of 2019 did not change what I believe. It simply added something to it, something I have never found a category for. Something that sits in my chest at 3 in the morning, like a stone that refuses to warm. The body came in on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when the county submitted its transfer paperwork, and I had been arguing with the filing system for 40 minutes when the ambulance bay doors opened and they wheeled her in. Female mid-40s, found in her apartment on Carver Street by a neighbor who noticed the mail piling up. No signs of trauma. No signs of forced entry. The neighbor said she had seemed fine the week before, had waved from across the hallway, had asked whether the mailman had left anything for her. The preliminary cause listed as suspected cardiac event. Pending autopsy. Standard. Unremarkable. I signed the intake form and transferred her. 2 drawer 7. Her name was Helen Marsh. I know that because it was on the form. Not because she told me, though by the end of the week I would find myself wishing she had spoken to me directly. Would find myself thinking that anything, any explanation at all, would have been easier than the silence she left behind. I processed her intake, photographed and tagged. Noted the pallor and the slight bloating, consistent with approximately 5 days of undiscovered death. And I closed the drawer and went back to my argument with the filing system. I do not remember thinking anything particular about her. That is the part that bothers me most, in retrospect. She was ordinary. That is what I keep coming back to. She was so thoroughly ordinary. The first thing happened at around 2 in the morning. I was at my desk eating a sandwich when the temperature monitor for the drawer bank showed a fluctuation on the screen. Not in 7. In 6, the empty drawer directly above her. Temperature in 6 dropped 4 degrees over the course of 8 minutes, then returned to baseline. I logged it, assumed a calibration error, made a note to have the technician check the sensor in the morning. I finished my sandwich. This is important. I finished my sandwich, which tells you the quality of my concern at that moment. I was not alarmed. I was mildly annoyed at the prospect of paperwork. The second thing happened 2 nights later. I was conducting a routine check of the drawer bank, the kind of walkthrough I had done thousands of times, drawer by drawer, confirming seals and temperatures. The work of maintenance and habit. When I reached drawer 7, I noticed the handle was slightly warm. Not warm in the way of malfunction, not warm in the way of mechanical failure. Warm in the way of a door handle on a summer afternoon. Warm in the way of a living hand held in yours. I pulled back immediately, checked my own hand, pressed it against drawer 6 and drawer 8. Both were the expected cold, the institutional cold, the cold of a building that exists to keep things from changing. I put my hand back on drawer 7's handle, and it was cold, just like the others, cold and ordinary and sealed. I stood there for a long time. I made no log entry about the warmth because I had no explanation for it, and I have always believed that a log entry without an explanation is more dangerous than no log entry at all. The third thing I cannot explain even now, and I have tried. And I have offered myself every rational possibility I could construct. On Thursday night, at approximately 1:45 in the morning, I heard breathing. Not the ventilation system, which I knew as well as I knew my own name. Its rhythms and its tendencies and its occasional shudder when the pressure in the south corridor shifted. Not pipes. Not the building settling, which produces a kind of groan and tick that is utterly distinct from respiration. Breathing, slow. Shallow, the breathing of a person in a light sleep. It was coming from the direction of the drawer bank. I stood absolutely still for what I believe was close to 2 minutes, though I could not swear to the exact duration because my watch felt very far away from me at that moment. Felt like a piece of information belonging to a world I was no longer fully inside. Then the breathing stopped. I walked to drawer 7. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Surfaced the way you might press your ear to a door. When you suspect someone is behind, nothing. Metal and cold and the faint, antiseptic smell that lives in every surface of that building. I opened the drawer to Helen Marsh was as I had left her. Of course she was. She was dead. She was 5 to 7 days post-mortem, and she was precisely as dead as that implies. And looking at her, I felt the specific shame of a rational man who has just done something irrational. I closed the drawer. I went back to my desk. I did not write anything down. I drank the rest of my cold coffee, and I told myself I was tired, which was true, and that tired men hear things, which is also true. I've told myself these things with the thoroughness of a man who needs to be convinced. The autopsy was performed Friday morning by Dr. Renata Falk, a pathologist I had worked alongside for 6 years, a woman whose professional opinion I respected without reservation. I was not present during the procedure, which was normal. I handled intake and storage, not procedure. Dr. Falk came to find me afterward, which was not normal. She came to my desk and she stood in the doorway for a moment before she spoke. And in that moment, I saw something on her face that I had never seen there before. Renata Falk had the face of a person who has spent her career looking at things most people cannot bear to look at. And on that face, I had never once seen uncertainty. I saw it then. She told me that Helen Marsh's cause of death was cardiac arrest, consistent with the preliminary assessment. She told me that the body was in the expected condition for the time elapsed. She told me these things in the careful, clipped way she told me everything. And then she paused, and in the pause, I heard the building's ventilation and nothing else. She said that when she opened the chest cavity, she found that the tissue around the heart, the pericardium, showed a pattern of pressure bruising consistent with sustained external compression. The kind of bruising, she said, choosing her words in the deliberate way of someone who has already argued with themselves about whether to say them at all, that would be produced by someone gripping the heart from the outside, from inside the chest. She said the pattern was bilateral, symmetrical, like 2 hands. She said she had photographed everything and consulted the reference literature and had found nothing that adequately explained what she was looking at. She said she was going to list cause of death as cardiac arrest because that was accurate and because she could not list the other thing, because the other thing had no medical language. Then she left. I sat at my desk for a long time after she left. I thought about drawer 6, the empty one, the one that had gone cold. I thought about the warmth on the handle of drawer 7. I thought about the breathing, and I thought about the way I had pressed my ear against the metal like a man who already knew, at some level below language and reason, that he was listening for something real. I have never told anyone what I heard. I have never filed a report about the temperature fluctuation beyond that first notation about a possible calibration error. One transferred out of the night shift 8 months later, citing personal reasons, which was accepted without question because I had 11 years of clean service. And no one felt the need to press. Helen Marsh's case was closed with cardiac arrest as cause of death. Her sister came to collect her effects. She was buried in Riverside Cemetery on a gray afternoon in late January. And I know this because I looked it up because I needed to know she was in the ground, which tells you something about the particular quality of the fear she left me with. Not the fear of ghosts. Not the fear of the supernatural, exactly. The fear of a man who has spent his career believing that death is the end of the conversation, and who has been forced to wonder with an uncertainty he cannot resolve and cannot dismiss, Weather sometimes, in some cases, in drawer 7 on a Tuesday in the winter. The conversation goes on a little longer than anyone has charted. And whether whatever is continuing that conversation is frightened. And whether it is alone. I am not a superstitious man. I want that on record before anything else, because what I am about to describe will invite that label, and I refuse to accept it passively. I am a structural engineer. I have spent 23 years reading buildings the way other men read faces, the load paths, the settled joints, the slow arithmetic of weight and time. I know what makes a house groan, and I know what makes it fall. I do not believe in hauntings. I did not believe in them. That distinction matters to me now in a way I cannot fully explain, except to say that the past tense is the only honest tense left when I talk about what I believe. The Meridian House came to me in October of last year through a routine insurance assessment. The firm representing the estate needed a structural report before the property could be listed. It had been vacant for 11 years, which is long enough for a building to develop opinions about itself. I drove out on a Thursday morning, alone, which was standard practice. The property sat at the end of a gravel road in a part of the county that had been developed in the 1920s and largely abandoned by the 1960s. The surrounding lots were overgrown. Their former houses reduced to foundation outlines and scattered brick. The Meridian House had survived because it was built better than its neighbors, or perhaps because it had been luckier. Or perhaps because luck is not the right word at all. From the outside, it was ordinary in the way that old houses often are, 2 stories. Clapped siding gone silver with age. A covered porch that listed slightly to the east. The windows were intact, which surprised me. Vacant properties in isolated areas usually lose their glass within a few years to weather or 2 boys with rocks. These panes were whole and clean, which was the first thing that did not fit, though I filed it without alarm and began my exterior documentation. I photographed the foundation, the chimney stacks, the soffit line. I noted the eastern lean of the porch and estimated the settlement at the northeast pier. I was professional. I was thorough. I was entirely calm. The front door was unlocked, which the estate attorney had warned me to expect. Inside, the air had the particular stillness of spaces that had been closed a long time. Not unpleasant, exactly, but present in a way that outdoor air never is. Dust lay over every surface in an even gray film. The furniture had been left in place. A sofa in the front room. A dining table with 4 chairs. A standing lamp with its shade still on. Whoever had lived here had not taken much when they left. This is not unusual. People leaving under difficult circumstances often leave quickly. And the Meridian estate had indeed involved difficult circumstances. The last occupant, a man named Caldwell, had died in the house in the winter of 2013. Natural causes, the file said. He was 71 and had lived there alone for the last 4 years of his life. I worked through the ground floor methodically, checking joists and the crawlspace access beneath the kitchen, tapping walls for hollow sections, photographing the areas where moisture had worked into the plaster near the north-facing windows. It was slow work and quiet work, the kind I have always preferred. After about an hour, I moved to the second floor. The staircase was sound, oversized treads, mortise and tenon balusters, the kind of craftsmanship that simply does not exist anymore. I photographed it because I always photograph what is done well, not only what is failing. There were 4 rooms on the second floor. 3 were ordinary 2-bedrooms and a bathroom, all carrying the same dust, the same still air, the same sense of interrupted time. The 4th room at the end of the hall had its door closed. I put my hand on the knob and noticed, with a detached professionalism that has served me well for 2 decades, that the metal was cold, significantly colder than the surrounding air. I noted it. I opened the door. The room was empty. No furniture, no curtains, no fixtures on the walls. The floor was bare board, the walls bare plaster. The single window faced north, and the light coming through it was flat and even, the kind of light that removes all shadow. I stepped inside and began my survey, moving along the walls, checking for separation at the corners, running my fingers along the baseboard to feel for any give. The room felt smaller than its dimensions suggested. I noted this too, and told myself it was the emptiness that did it, the absence of any object to give scale. I have been in many empty rooms. They all feel slightly wrong in the same way. But this one felt wrong in a different way. And I am trying to be precise when I say that, because I am aware of how thin the line is between precise observation and retrospective fabrication. What happened next? I have reconstructed carefully from the notes I made in my field book immediately afterward because I did not trust memory alone. I was standing at the north wall, perhaps 8 feet from the window, when I became aware that something had changed in the room behind me. Not a sound, or not exactly a sound, a quality, a density in the air at my back that had not been there when I entered. I turned around. The room was empty. Of course it was empty. I stood and looked at it for what I estimate was 30 seconds, which is a long time to stand and look at an empty room. Long enough that I recognized the behavior as anomalous and made myself continue working. I finished the north wall. I moved to the east wall. And then, while I was crouched at the baseboard in the southeast corner, I heard footsteps on the floor directly above me. There was no floor directly above me. The room was on the 2nd story. Above it was the attic. I had not accessed the attic yet. I stood up slowly and listened. The footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, moving from one end of the attic to the other, pausing, moving back. Not the settling of timber, not the contraction of old boards in changing temperature. I know those sounds. I have known them for 23 years. These were footsteps, weight and displacement. The specific cadence of a person walking without hurry across a wooden floor. I left the room. I went to the hallway and found the attic access, a hatch in the ceiling above a small closet at the top of the stairs, with a fold-down ladder. I pulled the ladder down and climbed it. The attic was empty. Dust lay over the floor in a continuous, undisturbed sheet. There were no footprints. Not mine. I had not yet been up there, and not anyone else's. The dust was pristine, untouched. The attic smelled of old insulation and dry wood and nothing else. I stood in it for several minutes. I looked at the floor. I walked across it myself, and the boards creaked under my weight. And I noted the sound they made, and I climbed back down. I completed my inspection. I took all the photographs I needed. I wrote my site notes in the truck before I drove away. Because I have a rule about not letting time pass between observation and documentation. My notes are factual and specific. They describe what I heard. They do not interpret it. Interpretation is not part of a structural report. But I am not writing a structural report now. I submitted my findings to the estate attorney. The report was accepted. The property was listed. It sold within 6 weeks to a couple from the city who intended to renovate it. I thought that was the end of my involvement. Then, 4 months later, I received an email from the buyer. He had found my name in the original assessment and wanted to ask me something. He wrote that during the renovation they had opened the walls in the north bedroom, the empty room, to replace the insulation, and that inside the wall cavity, sealed between the studs, they had found a wooden box approximately the size of a shoebox, nailed shut. Inside the box were personal effects, a leather wallet, a key on a plain ring, a folded envelope. The envelope contained a letter. The buyer said the letter was addressed to nobody. It simply began in a handwriting he described as very careful and very small. Asterisk. I know you can hear this room. It has been waiting longer than I have. Don't look for what made the sound. It doesn't matter what made it. What matters is that it knows you heard. Asterisk, I have not responded to his email. I do not know what I would say. The box, based on the positioning the buyer described, was inside the wall of the room where I stood that October morning. It had been there for an unknown number of years, sealed in darkness, in silence. Whatever was written in that letter had been written for someone who would one day stand in that room and hear what I heard, and then look for what caused it, and then find nothing, and then leave. Someone had predicted me. Someone had known exactly what would happen, in exactly what sequence, before it happened. That is the part I cannot fit into any framework I own. I have tried. I have spent months trying. I am a structural engineer. I understand load paths. I understand how weight moves through a building, how stress finds the shortest route to ground. I do not understand this. I am not certain I am meant to. I found the motel on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels like the middle of everything and the end of nothing. I had been driving for 11 hours straight, somewhere between Flagstaff and nowhere. And the rain had started doing that thing where it comes sideways and the wipers can't keep up and you stop trusting your own eyes. The sign said Pinecrest Motor Lodge and the Ian Lodge was burned out, so it read Lodge, and I remember thinking that was exactly right. That was exactly the kind of place this was going to be. I pulled in because I had no choice. My phone had died somewhere around mile marker 214. And the gas gauge was resting on the line below E that doesn't have a name. The man at the front desk was maybe 60, maybe 80, with the kind of face that weather makes over decades of indifference. He didn't look up when I came in. He was watching a small television mounted in the corner. The screen showing static with occasional shapes moving through it. And I thought it was a bad channel until I realized there was no channel. That he was just watching static, and that the shapes I was seeing were not artifacts of bad reception. He gave me room 7. He said it was the only one available. And I didn't question it because the parking lot had 2 other cars and a motel with 16 rooms and 2 guests doesn't have availability problems. I should have questioned it. Room 7 was at the far end of the ground floor, separated from room 6 by a gap in the building that seemed wider than it should have been, as if the architect had made a miscalculation or a deliberate choice. And the door to room 7 was slightly recessed, set back maybe 8 inches from the face of the building, so that standing in front of it felt like standing in a shallow throat. The key was an actual key, not a card, heavy brass with the numbers stamped into it, and the lock took 3 tries and a specific angle of pressure before it turned. Inside was a bed, a dresser, a bathroom, a television bolted to the wall on a metal bracket, a single window that faced the parking lot. The carpet was that particular shade of green that motels used in the 1970s and never updated. The color of something that was once alive. I set my bag down on the dresser because I did not want to set it on the floor, and I was not sure why. I showered. The water was hot, and then not hot, and then scalding with no middle ground. No transition, just the 2 states alternating without pattern. I dried off with a towel that had been washed so many times it had gone translucent in places. I got into bed, and I turned off the light, and I listened to the rain against the window. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I've spent 4 months trying to find the language for it, and I am not sure I have found it yet. I was not asleep. I know people say this, and they are usually wrong. They are usually in that liminal state where the brain is already dreaming and interpretation becomes unreliable. But I was not in that state. I had been lying in the dark for perhaps 20 minutes, running through the logistics of the next day, calculating driving time, thinking about whether my client in Phoenix would accept the revised proposal, performing the ordinary arithmetic of a functional adult life. I was awake. I heard something move in the room. Not outside the room. Inside it. It was not a rodent sound, not the skittering of something small navigating the baseboards. It was a displacement of air, a shift in the pressure of the darkness. The way sound changes when a body moves through a space and the space responds. I lay still. I have read enough about fight-or-flight to understand that what the body does first is freeze. That stillness is a survival response and not a failure of nerve, but knowing that did not make it easier to move. I reached for my phone and remembered my phone was dead. I reached for the lamp and found it and turned the switch and nothing happened. I turned it again. Nothing. The power was out or the bulb was gone. Or something I did not want to think about had happened to the lamp in the time between when I turned it off and now. I lay in the dark and I listened and the thing in the room was still. I became aware, slowly, of a smell. It is difficult to describe with any precision because it had no single referent, no clean analogy. It was organic, but not biological, or it was biological, but not alive, or it was alive, but not in the way that living things are supposed to be alive. There was something sweet underneath it and something chemical above it, and neither quality mitigated the other. I breathed through my mouth. I made a decision that I would get up and get to the door and I would leave the room, and I did not care about my bag or my keys or any of the ordinary objects of my life. I moved to the edge of the bed and I sat up and I put my feet on the floor. The carpet was wet. It had not been wet when I came in. I know this because I had walked barefoot from the bathroom to the bed and I had registered the texture of the carpet, dry and slightly stiff, and now it was wet, saturated. And the water was not cold. It was body temperature. It was exactly the temperature of something alive. I stood up and I moved toward where the door should have been, and my hand found the wall and I moved along it until I found the door and I found the handle and I turned it and it opened and I was outside in the rain and I stood in the parking lot in my bare feet on the wet asphalt and I did not go back inside. I stood there for a long time. The rain was slowing. The office light was still on. I walked to the office and the old man was still watching his static and he looked up. When I came in, and his expression was not surprise. It was something adjacent to recognition, as if he had been expecting this specific interruption at some unspecified point in the evening. I told him there was something wrong with my room. He looked at me and said, "Which one did I put you in?" I said 7. He looked back at the television and said, "I thought I gave you 6. I told him the key said 7. He said the keys get mixed up sometimes. He said he was sorry about that. He said he should have checked. I asked him what was in room 7. He did not answer immediately. He watched the static for several seconds, and in the static, there were those shapes again. The ones I had noticed before, and now that I was closer, I could see that they were not random. That they had a consistency of form, that they appeared and dissolved and appeared again in the same configuration. Like something trying to hold a shape and not quite managing. He said a man had died in room 7 in 1987. He said that was not unusual for a motel. People died in motels. It was a statistical inevitability when you ran a roadside property for 40 years. He said what was unusual was what had been in the room when they found him. He stopped there. I waited. He turned the television off and the shapes disappeared, and the room was just a room. Fluorescent light, a laminate counter, a rack of local brochures. He said the man had checked in alone. He said when they opened the room in the morning, there were 2 of everything. 2 indentations on the pillow. 2 sets of wet footprints from the bathroom to the bed. 2 used towels. 1 body. He said since then he kept the room locked. He rented the other 15 rooms, and he kept 7 locked, but sometimes the keys got mixed up. He'd had the same keys for 40 years, and sometimes in the dark, they were hard to tell apart. He gave me room 6, and he did not charge me for the night. In the morning, I checked out early and drove to Phoenix and met my client and accepted his counterproposal, and ate a sandwich and called my sister and did all the things a person does on a Wednesday. My feet were clean. The carpet residue had washed off in the shower in room 6 without leaving any mark. There was nothing physical that persisted, no evidence, no documentation. Only the memory of the temperature of that water, exactly body temperature. Exactly the temperature of something that had been lying in the dark of that room for 38 years. Waiting for the weight of another body on the bed, waiting for feet to touch the floor. Waiting for the confirmation that it was not alone.